How nice to be back here in Ocean Park. I thank you for the invitation, Gary. It's been probably 40 years since my mentor, John Wilbur, convinced me to come up here. He actually tricked me, I think, Debbie and I, because he wanted us to teach a course to the campers in sex education. I paid for that for some time. It's also to be wonderful to be reunited with so many friends. I particularly want to recognize Jan Hernevitz, one of the most gifted and joyful ministers I've ever known and worked with. I'm honored to be included in your list of summer preachers, although I see that I'm the only one that's come from outside the Northeast. I guess you got the Smiths here for a little southern bonding for us. I guess I feel a little bit like a missionary that you sent out to foreign lands who has come back to report to you on the state of affairs in those foreign places. I can say that we have remained faithful to the Red Sox and the Patriots and the Celtics and the Bruins. I must confess, though, that we have been converted. Pulled pork barbecue with Carolina sauce is oh so good. It's oh so good. We find Southerners warm and friendly, but the South can be a dangerous place and a little sneaky. Beware of Southern iced tea. It's so sweet it'll make your teeth ache. And there's an important linguistic lesson that I would certainly want to share with you. It involves the phrase, bless your heart. It's not an expression of affection. It's sort of a sly, gentle put down. For instance, upon leaving church after service, where a couple of folks might have heard a rather dull preacher preach his sermon, they might turn to each other and say, bless his heart, he tries. Being here in Maine, I pray that I don't hear that phrase this morning. There is in the Sufi Muslim tradition a habit of telling stories about a comic prophet called Nasruddin. You may have heard of Nasruddin. One story says that one night Nasruddin had come home from a particularly late engagement, and he got out in front of his house and he dropped his keys in the street. And he got down on his hands and knees under the street light and groped around in the street looking for his keys. And after about 10 minutes, a friend came by and said, Nasruddin, what are you doing down in the street like that? And he said, well, I dropped my keys. And the friend said, well, here, let me help you look. And so the friend got down on his hands and knees there under the street light, and the two of them groped around for another 10 minutes. And finally, in some degree of exasperation, the friend said, now, Nasruddin, just where were you when you dropped the keys? And Nasruddin said, oh, about 20 feet that way. And the friend said, well, what are you doing here? And Nasruddin said, well, the street light's here and I can see better. Sometimes what we're looking for isn't always in the light. Sometimes it's in the dark places. And we shouldn't be afraid to go there to find what we're looking for. Despite the wonderful life-giving images of water that fill the Bible, there is another image of the biblical waters that the writers were eager to share. Brother Scalisi touched on it 2 weeks ago. Dark and stormy seas color the biblical narrative from Genesis to Revelation. And these scenes appear as often as the life-giving ones. The sea represents the forces of chaos. To the biblical mind, the sea is itself a threat, representing all the anxieties and dark powers that threaten the goodness of the created order. That's why when we come to the water, for all of the happy times of frolicking in the sea, it's important to lay back on the beach every now and then and take a moment and reflect on the other realities of the sea. Sometimes those dark and stormy seas, and what they symbolize for us. The coming of the storm on the sea represents a decisive moment for those caught in it. Facing the full force of nature, we see people at their most vulnerable, stripped away of pretense, and needing to make crucial choices or clarify their commitments. It's time to stay or go, sink or swim, fight or run. Now, apart from St. Paul, the players in most of the stormy biblical narratives don't often robe themselves in glory. Basically, they're a quivering bunch of wimps. Jonah is by far the most humorous and one of my favorites. When the Lord Almighty calls Jonah to be a prophet, he responds by running away and getting on a boat scheduled to sail far across the Mediterranean. Soon, a bemused but no doubt annoyed sovereign stirs up a great storm that threatens to sink Jonah's boat. When the storm hits, Jonah manages somehow to disappear down the hole for a nap. Terrified, he throws everything he can overboard and finally decides, after all of that, that it's Jonah that's the problem. At the climax of the story, Jonah, who in his heart knows what needs to happen, is finally confronted by the crew, and he confesses that he's the cause of the trouble, and in faithful acceptance of his fate, asks that he be thrown overboard. At that, the relieved crew happily tosses Jonah into the churning sea, where he promptly falls into the mouth of a waiting whale. We need to note, however, that the very moment that Jonah goes overboard, the sea stops raging. Leaving the boat marked the transition of Jonah's fear and the beginning of his acceptance of God's prophetic call to discipleship. There is, of course, another familiar biblical story that Amy read for us. In this one, the disciples are in a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee. Several of them, including Peter, are accomplished fishermen. But such a terrible storm has blown up during their 4 a.m. crossing that they're terrified that they might sink. With Jesus, who it seems happens to be out for an early morning aquatic power walk. They scream to him, and Jesus says, "Don't be afraid." But Peter is absolutely desperate for the security that Jesus represents and pleads for help. In response, Jesus extends his hand and says, "Come, come." So Peter tentatively puts one foot out of the boat, and almost as soon as he does, though, his concentration shifts to the billowing wind, and he begins to sink. Maybe this is the real reason why they call Peter the Rock. As he sinks, Peter cries, "Lord, save me." Jesus reaches out again, says, "Come," tells him to put his fears away, and in faith, Peter finally gets out of the boat. There are about 12 great sermons here, but much to your relief, I'll just concentrate on one. I invite you to consider the moment when Jesus says, "Come." And the next line, And Peter got out of the boat. And Peter got out of the boat. What is it about us? We are not people who are given to getting out of boats in the middle of a stormy sea. In difficult moments like this, our fears take hold of us. And our feet are nailed to the floor, and we grab onto anything we can to secure ourselves. The bigger the storm, the greater the likelihood that we will scurry below deck and hold up there with our eyes closed and pretend to sleep like Jonah, hoping that it will go away. But it isn't just boats and stormy seas, is it? This is an enduring metaphor, these stormy seas and boats. Fear has always been with us, and sometimes fear is good and appropriate. If some guy in a hockey mask chasing you with a machete comes around the corner, it's okay to be afraid. But it's only a movie that plays on fear, so you don't have to spill your popcorn yet. We feel, however, the more genuine, acute kind of fear when we face things like death, or disease, or a car crash, or a fire. There is in this another kind of fear, not as acute, more indirect, and unfortunately often ungrounded. Greeks called it the vague anticipation of evil, or the feelings that build toward our phobias. A sense that something powerful but unknown may be approaching. We know this kind of anxiety, don't we? So much in our lives these days is in the grips of these kinds of indirect, vague fears. That's why the biblical story is so relevant for us. The stormy seas are a perfect metaphor for all the fear-filled things that haunt us every day, or that we're told we should fear, and keep us from living authentic, faith-filled lives. Fear can do amazing things to our minds, can't it? Fear has serious consequences. When our hearts are full of fear, we don't seek truth. We seek security. Fear attacks our physical health, weakens our immune system, stresses our hearts and our digestive systems. It damages our long-term memory. Fear robs us of joy. Fear blocks our ability to discern what's happening around us. It jacks up our emotions and builds and blinds our ethical choices. When we're afraid, we're more tribal. We stick with our own kind, and we're wary of anyone that's different. The fearful are most prone to violence. Fear is a tyrant and a bully. It makes us prime fodder for demagogues. Nations succeed or fail and define their essential character by the way they challenge the unknown and cope with fear. We used to be known as the most courageous country in the world, but today we're at a pivotal moment because now fear has permeated our culture almost completely. We live in our own age of anxiety. The American home security business is booming. Do you know that it has grown by $30 billion in the last 5 years alone? Home developers regularly speak of the architecture of fear, and the fastest growing segment of building is in gated communities. All the while, actual home burglaries in the U.S. has dropped to its lowest rate in 40 years. A huge disparity between what we fear and what the reality is. We know this. We know that we're more likely to be killed in a car accident or by our own clothes than we are by a Muslim immigrant. There are lower felony rates among undocumented immigrants than regular citizens. Yet fear dominates all of our narratives about immigrants, as well as our talk about the economy, our borders, voting, and guns. Do you know that there are more guns in the United States than there are people? And of that number, 8 million are AR-15 assault rifles. What in God's name are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? What can enable us to overcome these indirect and often unfounded fears? What can finally change our perspective? Yes, facts and truth will help. We certainly need more of that because ignorance is the leading source of fear. But the biblical lesson for today says that there's something deeper, more essential that we need to concentrate on. Faith. What was the critical factor for both Jonah and Peter? Faith changes our frame of reference. Faith gives us a new center point, a deeper kind of security. Faith enables us to step out and embrace what Bonhoeffer in his book on discipleship calls endless insecurity, abandoning false ideas of safety and giving oneself completely into the hand of God. Stepping out of the finite into the infinite, we become utterly powerless in the face of the stormy deep, but we put our hand in God's hand and take that step. If Peter had not stepped out of the boat, he would have remained a prisoner to his doubts and his fears. His step out in the tempestuous sea is completely impossible, logically stupid, and ethically irresponsible if all we can see is the literalness of that act. But he has no hope, no prospect of transformation unless he responds to Jesus and gets out of that boat. The road to faith is bound up in Peter's response to that one word, come, the invitation to discipleship. The call alone creates an unparalleled opportunity to free oneself from fear. That's why faith is so countercultural. When we answer that call and step out of those boats into the stormy seas, we are no longer relying on anybody else's definition of security. We don't need to be afraid. We don't need to be afraid of immigrants or other people of other races or genders or people who don't look like us, think like us, love like us, or worship like us. Yet to step out in the face of overwhelming odds is risky. But you see, risk is an essential part of faith because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. Risk is the hallmark of discipleship. The person who risks nothing is one who does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. There is no witness in it. Fearful and chained by certitude, self-imposed slavery is the only option. Freedom is forfeit. Good news, the good news, has no messenger if there is no one to take a risk. Faith and obedient activity are inextricably linked. What's the most often repeated phrase in the Bible? Be not afraid. 365 times. Be not afraid. As the psalmist says, yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. When challenged to get out of our fear-filled boats and confront the challenges and storms that surround us, too often we respond like Jonah saying, I don't have what it takes. I'm not the one you want. But the scripture tells us that it was ordinary folks, just like us, who through their faith managed to get out of the boat, become disciples, and turn the world upside down. As my friend William Sloane Coffin used to say, the goal of the Christian life is not so much saving your soul as it is to transform yourself so that you can be a witness to God's peace and love in the world. Now, some 2,000 years on, we sit here this morning with Jesus' haunting invitation echoing in our brains. Come. Come. As we contemplate our lives, our call to meaning, there really is only one message for us. Get out of the boat. Feeling inadequate and unsure, so did Jonah and Peter. So do all the disciples, and so does everyone else in this temple. It doesn't matter how old you are, what your gender is, how rich or poor you are, those are just excuses. Get out of the boat. Goethe said, the greatest dangers of life are infinite, and chief among them is safety. Get out of the boat. Look at the world around you. Fear is everywhere. Look into people's faces, and you'll see the look caused by unfounded anxiety and grief. Too many people are paralyzed in fear. If you want to do something about it, you've got to get out of the boat. Listen to the desperate cries of the victims of fear, hatred, and violence from Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Charleston, San Antonio, and Uvalde. Can you hear their cries? If they are to find peace, it depends on us, overcoming our fears in faith, embracing the love that will give us the courage to do something about it. Get out of the boat. If you want to walk on water, my friends, you have to get out of the boat. Go ahead. You can do it. I know you can. Get out of the boat. Amen. Be not afraid. Let the blessing of Almighty God descend upon you, settle in around you, and make its home in you. Be not afraid. Go in peace.